Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. Today in the garage we're going to be installing our Blitz Front Bumper on our 2022 Nissan Frontier. Now before our bumper can be installed, obviously there's going to be some disassembly that needs to be done here, specifically so that we can get this lower kind of black plastic portion along with this silver section down here out of the way, because that's the general location that our bumper is going to be installed. Now with that being said, I'm going to lower this down and open up the hood, where we'll start by removing the grille. So up here under the hood, you're going to be looking for the 6 plastic clips along the back of this grille support structure. Those can be removed using a clip removal tool or a flat blade screwdriver, just by getting under the edge of the center section, popping it up, and then removing the entire clip. If your Frontier is equipped with a front mount camera here in the emblem, like the one we're working on, you're going to need to reach in through kind of the hood latch cutout behind the grille and just disconnect the harness going to that. Nothing too complicated there. This is just a kind of standard thumb press tab, and then that slides right off of the connector. Next, we'll work our way along the bottom edge of the grille, removing 7 clips holding it to this red bumper valance portion. For that, you'll reach back in through the back here. There's going to be a small tab that needs to be pushed up, as well as a little pressure put out on the grille, and you can work your way across here, getting all of those removed. Just keep that little bit of pressure and they should all stay out as you work across here. Once all 7 of those are free, you can come over, just pick one side of the grille to start with, grab a hold of it and just kind of pull firmly straight out, and that should free up the side clips over here, and then we can go over and do the same thing on this other side. So here you can now see those clips. This is the center portion that needs to be pushed up to release those, and here you see the slots that those align with. Next, you can remove the 3 clips here holding the fascia into these front braces. These are just like the clips you removed earlier in the top side of the grille. Now we've moved down underneath the front of the vehicle, and we're going to remove this factory front skid plate. Now I've already loosened up the other side, so what you're going to be working with is these 2 bolts up here just below the factory tow hook. You can leave the mounting hardware here. You'll loosen the back bolt and just kind of let it hang like that, and then fully remove this front bolt. Make sure you're supporting the skid as you do this. And then you can grab a hold of it and slide forward off of those mounts and get this entire skid out of the way. And then with the skid removed, you can grab your tow hook and simply push it back through the opening in the front bumper. It'll drop off of its bolt and slide out of the vehicle. Then you can grab a 10mm socket and remove the 6 mounting screws along the bottom edge here. So there's 4 in the center and then 1 out on each end of this fascia. Now we can move over into the wheel opening, where you'll be removing a clip down here with your panel tool or screwdriver, and then come out here with a Phillips and remove the 2 screws holding this front edge of the flare. Then you can grab a hold of the bottom edge of the flare here, and we're just going to pull straight out. That should pop enough clips to access some of the remaining hardware behind here. So there's going to be the 2 black screws you see here that again can be removed with your Phillips bit. Then continuing up behind the flare, you can either switch back to a 10mm or use a Phillips here to remove the remaining hex bolt. So that's what you're dealing with there. Now once you've done that on both sides, you'll also need to disconnect the wire harness for these factory fog lights in this fascia. So for that, you can gain access through the bottom here where the fascia and the wheel liner meet, and kind of reach up through there and find that plug. Now if you do need a little bit more room to gain access to that, or just be able to see it while you're working with it, you can manipulate this wheel liner out from behind the fascia so you can get in here and work a little bit better. Now there is a clip up here that can be removed to make this a little bit easier. Isn't necessarily required, but then you should be able to just kind of pull back and then a little bit out on the fascia and get that wheel liner to pop out enough that you can reach that plug through here. So with that pulled back, now you can see the plug we're trying to access here. Basically, you'll just need to gently pull out on this top tab and then slide down on the connector to get those removed. And you can just go do the same thing on the other side. At this point, the last thing holding the fascia onto the vehicle is the internal retaining clips inside of these upper corners here. So to get those removed, you'll need to kind of pull out on this wheel flare. Reaching behind here, you can also kind of press out on the fascia itself, and then preferably with a plastic pry tool, or you may even be able to get your fingers in here. You can very carefully get in behind this upper edge and open that up enough so that you can grab a hold of it, and then slowly and very carefully just pull out, which should free the fascia from its retainers. And then just make sure that you're also pulling out on this flare while you slide this forward. Now you may want to grab an extra set of hands at this time, simply because when you do this on the other side as well, this fascia will be free from the vehicle, and it may just be helpful so you don't drop it and damage it in any way. Once you have those clips freed up on the other side, you can simply grab a hold and pull straight out very carefully. And then if any of this foam happens to fall out or anything, don't worry about that. Just set it aside for now and we can deal with that later. As for the fascia, we'll take this over onto a bench or a cart and do a little bit of work with it. Now that we have the fascia out of the vehicle, we've kind of flipped it over here on our cart, and we're going to begin removing that lower black portion. So for that, you can start with 2 screws, one on each side out here, that can be removed with a 10mm socket. And once those are out of the way, it's just a series of clips all the way along this edge here. These are the same style clips for the most part as the lower end of the grill that you removed earlier, where you just kind of press a tab and pop them out of their slot. The only one that's just slightly different is down here on the end. There's one on each side that also has a couple locking tabs on the back side that you'll have to kind of work out as you press in on the opposite side. So after you work your way around and release all these clips, you should be able to just kind of push and separate the 2 halves, and then you can get rid of that black lower section. Now this remaining section of the fascia will be reinstalled pretty much as is, but not until we've gotten a couple things done here on the truck. So up here, we're going to be working to remove what is essentially the adaptive cruise sensor here on this lower crash bar mount. You'll start out by popping this clip free out here. That's just for the wiring harness, so we can free that up. Now before you go any further, I will note the kind of large lettering here that says "Do not drop" in capitals with an exclamation. Just be sure to use caution as you work with this sensor. Make sure you're not hitting it, dropping it, causing any harm to it, so that it still functions properly once relocated. With that being said, grab a 10mm socket, and you can loosen and remove the 3 nuts here, holding this sensor to its mounting bracket. And then you should be able to carefully slide that off its studs and release the electrical connector out here on the side. And then just make sure to push that harness back through the bracket so that it's not hanging up as we get this crash bar removed. Next, moving over to the passenger side of this crash bar, you'll need to remove this wiring harness mounting bracket with a 10mm wrench. With the bolt removed, just pick that up to release the locating tab, and just kind of tuck this out of the way for now while we work on the crash bar hardware. For this step, you'll need a 17mm socket, and you're going to have 1 mounting bolt up here, as well as 1 kind of buried in the back of this hole through here. Now when you go remove the other 2 bolts on the other side, this crash bar will be free to fall away from the vehicle, so make sure you have it supported in some way. Now we need to remove this lower metal splash guard. For that, you can remove the front 2 bolts and loosen the rear 2 back under here using a 10mm socket. And then the back of that is slotted, so it should be able to just slide forward and off of the vehicle. Now just note as you're getting this removed that it will not be reused during reassembly. So with that crash bar out of the way, we can now take our remaining fascia section and get it reinstalled up here on the vehicle, just making sure that this upper foam piece is back in place if yours was removed at all during that disassembly. So when you're getting this back in, it's pretty much just the reversal of how it came out. You just want to make sure you get the center up high enough to get over those tabs. You're going to want to get this area up high enough that it locks into the retainer here, and then just use caution as you come back, making sure you're pulling out on the flare and not scuffing against the side of the headlight here. When it gets back kind of where it should be, it should nest in pretty easily like you saw there, and then you should just have to kind of lightly press in to make sure it's snapped in to all its retaining clips. Once you're confident you have everything snapped back into its retainers up here, you can make sure your wheel liner is properly back in place and then snap this fender flare back in as well. Then just go repeat that process over on the other side. And you'll want to remember now, before the grille goes back in, to reinstall the 3 clips here along the center. Now at this point we can move into the assembly side of things with your new bumper. So we'll be installing your aftermarket lights, your winch, and we'll begin with the outer trim plate out here. So for this you'll obviously need the trim plate itself. Make sure the logo's in the correct orientation. That'll tell you you have this the right way. Then you'll also want to find the 1/4-20 button head hardware in your bolt pack, along with the serrated flange nuts that are going to back it up here on the inside as you tighten this up. So I'm just going to put one in here to start lining things up, and we'll get all of these kind of finger tight before we tighten anything in place. To tighten this button head hardware up, you just need a 5/32 hex, and you can just work your way around to all 6 bolts. So next, if you are going to be installing an aftermarket center light bar, now is when you'll want to get that in place before you have a winch in here kind of crowding things up. So simply slide that in to the 2 light bar mounting tabs here. These should accommodate most 20-inch light bars on the market, but as a rough number, you should have 22 inches inside to inside here to work with. So go ahead and just compare that to the light bar that you're looking to purchase and make sure that's going to work for you. Once you're happy with your light placement, go ahead and tighten it up using the light manufacturer's provided hardware. Next, we'll install our outer pod lights, which for these you want to refer to your specific light manufacturer's directions in terms of getting your mounting brackets installed to the lights and the hardware that they include. And then all of these lights are going to install to our slotted tab here on the inside of the bumper. With all our lights in place, we can now install our winch. In this case, we're going to be installing a Warn Xeon 10S, but the bolt hole pattern here in the bottom of the bumper is going to accommodate most aftermarket winches on the market. And then once you get that bolted securely in place, we provide black plastic hole plugs to kind of clean up and finish off the look of the bottom face of the bumper. So this should just be as simple as dropping it in and getting your hardware lined up. Now once you're actually securing the winch in here, you want to refer to your specific winch manufacturer and their instructions for things like hardware, torque specs, and even just how to get your specific winch wired. After that, just one more thing to note would be the winch solenoid as well as clearance as you're getting it installed on the truck, because all these winches are a little bit different obviously. Some may require a solenoid relocation, so just use caution as you're sliding this in place here. Make sure you got enough room for that. With all that being said, now we can take our bumper with the winch and our lighting and get it installed to the truck. Now when mounting the bumper up here on the truck, we're going to be reusing the 2 holes here on each side for the crash bar mounting location, as well as the 2 lower holes where the tow hook was, along with their factory hardware. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and remove that final bolt from the back of that tow hook location. And then as we slide that bumper in, there's going to be a cutout that kind of nests around the front of this mount, allowing it to come up and sit flush to the bottom of the frame here. Now over here on the passenger side, I will point out that wire harness bracket we removed earlier will secure to the top side of our bumper once everything's fastened in place, but for now, you just want to make sure everything's kind of up and out of the way. And then as you lift this up in, you want to make sure that these inner air dam pieces are getting pushed kind of inside of our mounts, and that you're not hanging up on the wheel liners underneath back here. Obviously the bumper gets a little bit heavy once you add all the accessories in here, so we threw ours up on a trans jack since we're working with the vehicle in a lift. You can accomplish pretty much the same thing with like a motorcycle jack or a regular floor jack in your driveway if you're doing this on the ground or on jack stands, or even just grab a couple of your friends to help you throw this up in place. So that cutout on the mount side that we referenced earlier is going to prevent you from getting all the way up unless you also have this all the way back. So just be conscious of that as you're getting this up into place. Make sure you've got plenty of clearance all the way around, so kind of take your time with this step. Now on the bottom side here, you're kind of looking at this from the rear of the vehicle, if you will. We can go ahead and install our mounting hardware into the 2 lower mounting slots. And then you can also see here where that front frame horn nests into our bumper cutout. Then as for your front mounting hardware, you can reach through the cutouts here in the sides and get those installed into that front frame rail. After you have all your main mounting hardware loosely installed and even kind of snugged up just a little bit, you will want to check the side-to-side adjustment of the bumper and make any minor adjustments there as needed. And then you can grab a 17mm socket to tighten these up. Now up inside of here, you may need to grab a ratchet or even a ratcheting wrench to help you out getting these tight. Now generally speaking, we try to leave all our hardware just a little bit loose until everything is started by hand, and then work our way around and tighten things up. However, in this case, you can use these lower mounting bolts to kind of manipulate the bumper up and down as needed to line up the front mounting slots. After tightening your winch mounting hardware, if you haven't done so already, you can install the black plastic hole caps here on the bottom. Then we've provided you with hardware to accommodate the factory black splash shield down here. For that, you're going to need to install these clip nuts into the cutouts here in the bottom of the bumper. Those should just slide in and push over to line up with these holes. They may require the help of a small flat screwdriver just to manipulate them into place. And there's going to be one here and one over on the other side. And then you can grab that shield, slide it back on to the 2 factory bolts that we left loose earlier, and install the provided 5/16 button heads up here at the bumper side. Then you can tighten these button heads with a 3/16 hex and the frame side bolts with a 10mm socket. On the outer corners here, you'll be sliding in a provided plastic spacer and installing a new M6 button head bolt along with a washer to secure this outer fascia to the bumper. You can simply slide the spacer up between the 2 and line that up on the bolt. And then as needed, you can kind of pull this fascia in and get the bolt started. And you can tighten those using a 4mm hex. With all the hardware tight in here, you can then grab your lower trim plates along with more of the black 1/4-20 button heads and serrated flange nuts and get these bolted in place. You should have plenty of room to access through the backside here to get those nuts installed, and then you can go do the same thing on the other side. With all 4 bolts loosely installed, you can grab a 5/32 hex to tighten them up. Now, if you haven't done so already, you'll want to come back over here and plug those factory fog lights back in before everything in this wheel opening gets buttoned up. And then we can get this wheel liner kind of manipulated back into place. Then it's just general reassembly here, so the 2 screws that go behind this flare into the wheel liner. Next, you'll want to remember to reinstall the hex head screw up here behind the flare. And then the flare can be snapped in place and the 2 screws here reinstalled. Now we do plan to trim the lower section of this where it's now hanging down below the bumper, but what I'm going to do is fully snap this back into place with the factory clips in both here and here, and then I'll make a mark, and if needed, we'll pop that back out to make our final cut. But if you're comfortable with cutting that in place, that's totally fine as well. Now, you can be really flexible on where you cut here because this is not a critical component of your bumper install, but our intention is to kind of maintain as much coverage under here as possible while still getting this up high enough that it's going to clear and not be kind of visually intrusive underneath the bumper there. So what we're seeing here on ours is it has this factory molding line in the flare that basically runs straight along, kind of in line with the end of our bumper here, and then just above the mount there. So I'm basically just going to mark it with some tape just to make it a little more clear, and then follow that straight across. And just a helpful reminder here, if you will, if you're not feeling super confident about your cut, be conservative. You can always cut more, but it's really hard to add it back on. So as far as what you're going to use to make your cut, I'm using a pair of just sheet metal shears or tin snips here. You can use a cutoff wheel or even an air saw if that's what you have at your disposal, whatever you're comfortable using. It's just some fairly thin plastic that we're working with here. Now I did wind up finishing this one off with a sharp razor blade. So again, kind of use the tools you have. And I came back and just tapered off this corner and radiused off the inside corner here just to make it look a little bit cleaner. And then I'll just jump over and do the same thing over on the other side. At this point, you can install the adaptive cruise sensor to its new mounting bracket. So it'll install basically to the inside of the stepped bracket here, and you can bolt it in place using 3 of the 1/4-20 button head bolts and flanged locking nuts, just right through the factory mounting locations here on the sensor. Then with a 5/32 hex, you can tighten these 3 up. With that assembled, it can be installed here to the back side of the grill. For that, you'll need to grab a Phillips bit and remove the 2 screws here in the back of the emblem. Then you can grab the sensor and bracket assembly. You'll kind of feed it down in around this bracket and line it up using the 2 alignment pins into these slots here. Then just take those 2 Phillips screws and reinstall them to secure it in place. Next, you can reroute the wire harness plug for that adaptive cruise sensor that is now going to be located up in the bottom portion of the grille. So you'll basically just kind of flip that around. It's no longer down, it's up here, kind of toward the center of the vehicle. That should give you plenty of slack in this wire to access that and plug it in. Now before this grille goes in, you'll want to make sure and reroute the wire harness plug for that adaptive cruise sensor that's now going to be located up here in the bottom of the grille. And then this is also a great time to get your winch wires routed up toward the battery and even get your accessory lights wired in. Once you're finished with all that wiring, you can snap the grille back into place. Again, just make sure all your clips are lined up before you give this any force so that you don't damage anything there. So kind of take your time on this step. And then that should pretty easily just snap back into place. And you can work your way across this bottom edge just to be sure all those lower clips are secure. Next, be sure to reach through the top up here and plug in the sensor as well as this front camera. And lastly, you can reinstall the 6 plastic clips along the top of that grille support. At this point, you can install your winch fairlead and hook to finish up your install. As always, you can check out our product page on our website for more detailed information. And then if you still have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or just give us a call at 269-459-8447.